The Honourable Pete Hodson.
Confused contribution, a somewhat bigoted contribution, and certainly a bewildered contribution from the Member of Parliament for Taranaki King Country, and a strange contribution because that member, of all members, was part of a government which voted to rapidly and significantly increase the rentals of farmers in his electorate because it was deemed to be the right thing to do in terms of sorting out where the balance of property ownership or property rights lay. And yet that same member is now speaking in favour of legislation which reduces the property rights of the owner and increases the property rights of the leasee in a law change which has got no basis in economics and is entirely done on the basis of lobbying. Because if the story's to be told, we need to be reminded that when this government, the Labor government, came to power 11 years ago, some lessees on high country stations were paying less than State House tenants for State Houses in Dunedin. One was $1,200 a year plus GST. Do we hear any stories about that from the National Party? No, we don't. Instead, we get from the Minister of Agriculture a vein-popping, shrill and strident contribution that says that the Labor Party is driven by jealousy and spite. This is not the case. The member to my right, David Parker, against whom the allegation was made, doesn't have a jealous or spiteful bone in his body, but he does believe in a fair suck of the salve. And it is reasonable, isn't it, for the opposition to ask the National Party, themselves great defendants and guardians of property rights, to please defend and guard property rights where the property right is owned by the taxpayer, not by the individual. All we want is a fair return. And that has been the case during the Labor government. A fair return was secured, except an opportunity was given to leaseholders if they thought that for whatever reason the rental was not payable, was not affordable, then they had the opportunity to come to the government and say, like they might to any other landlord, and say, look, this is too tough, it's too rough, we don't want to walk off the land, give us a reduction. And you know what? Can I ask the member for Taranaki King Country if he'd like to tell me how many leaseholders came forward to get a reduction in their rental when that opportunity was presented to them in a statutory framework? Many occasions, he said, on many occasions, says the member for Taranaki King Country. There's what the member for Taranaki King Country says. Here's the truth. The answer is none. Diddly squat. Not a single one. Zero. And they were written to individually. They were written to individually 3 times. So we can't have an argument coming from the National Party that they didn't know that the landlord was prepared to negotiate. They decided to play the longer game. They decided to socialise their losses, wait until they could get a law change, a government change, lobby the government for a change in legislation, which is what this is in front of us now, and say to themselves, just as well we didn't go cap in hand to that dirty, rotten, stinking Labor government for a reduction in rentals. We have got a substantial reduction in rentals, a substantial increase in our property rights as a result, whether we need it or not. Because, you see, there are some rich people from the US or from Indonesia who have bought up bits of the South Island High Country as personal bolt holes. That is the case. And they sit alongside real, live, ordinary, iconic sheep and beef farmers. I know a few of these people. I used to be a veterinarian in the High Country. I still wander into the High Country in Otago from time to time. In fact, I've spent time as Minister of Lands. I've met many run holders in that capacity. I probably met more run holders in my time than the member who's just resumed his seat who considers himself to be a cocky. Oh, and the Orange Roughie says, oh, rubbish. Well, she wouldn't know high country from... Actually, what a good question would be to the low country farmer who resumed his seat, why does he feel good about high country farmers getting a deal that would never be contemplated for the lowlands? Never. You see, this has been a cave in by a government who likes to think that it can get away with giving a bunch of money to 231 people, some of whom do not need it. In fact, nearly all of whom do not need it. In fact, when we wrote to them 3 times to ask whether any of them needed it, none of them said yes. So that's the size of the problem. We are accused of running these people off the land. We wrote to them 3 times saying, would you like a reduction? Oh, not one of them left. What they're doing, of course, from now on, when this legislation is passed, is that they'll capitalise their gains. When the next lease changes hands, it will be at a price higher than before. And should tenure review persist, then the amount paid by the state to get back its own land will go up. Or the amount that the state gets will go down, but usually it's the former of those 2 options. And so this is expensive in any respect. What do we want for the high country? Well, I think roughly what New Zealanders want for the high country is this. A list that something goes like this. The member who just resumed his seat has had his chance to have a say, and I didn't interrupt him. I can't hear him, and he didn't make any sense when I could. I would say that what the people of New Zealand want from the high country is this. First of all, we all enjoy the idea of there being some productive use of the high country. And whether we take a sort of a romantic, iconic, sort of Shrek, dries-a-bone approach to that, or a more informed, understanding view of the value of fine wools, is dependent on the person who's got the point of view. But all of us like the idea of a bit of high country production. And especially after tenure review, when we've been able to see more of the productive land being used, including for horticulture, it's great. It's wonderful. So that's one thing. Another thing where I think we would all agree is that it would be very good for New Zealanders to have in perpetuity reasonable access to the high country. Reasonable is all of that stuff about whether the sheep are lambing and on it goes. Reasonable access to the high country. A third thing that I think we could agree is that we would like it to be managed in such a way that there wasn't a whole bunch of unplanned activity, especially around waterways, a whole lot of building going up, let's say along Lake Tekapo or whatever the next lake is that comes in the sites of developers, as is happening in the Twizel area at the moment. Another thing that we could agree on is that, though you didn't get this balanced view from the member who resumed his seat, the member for Taranaki King Country, but we can agree that managing the exigencies of the high country, whatever they may be, you know, it might be wilding pines or it might be rabbits or anything in between, is hard work. It's hard work. And we can say as the member who resumed his seat, what's his name? Shanadun, says that the Crown is the landlord from hell, and in some cases that'll be true, undoubtedly. But I've spent a bit of time as the Minister of Lands, and I can say that there are some leaseholders who are, you know, neighbours from hell too, and there have been some shocking mistakes made, including mistakes made by people who really were trying hard to not make mistakes, really trying hard not to. Pinus contorta might do as an example for that. So we can agree that there's been abuses of the land, including abuses that are really people tried hard to avoid. But there's no point getting into a blame game much about that, as the member did. It's something that's going to have to be managed by all folk, and for the future, the owners of the effective managers of high country land will be a mixture of the Crown and leaseholders. So probably that's what New Zealanders want. And frankly, if we don't charge leaseholders what the land is worth, if we give away property rights, then we will see all of those aims will be reduced, and we will go backwards in our management of the high country of this country.